like to welcome you to the 18th Annual Commissioners Ag Forum. At this time, to get the program going, we will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance here in just a few moments. And so at this time, I'd like to welcome to the stage FFA students Gray Palmer, Samantha Rich, Taylor Hall with 4-H Council, and Mr. Josh Bledsoe, State FFA Advisor. They will lead us in our Pledge of Allegiance once the flag has been presented. And now for the presentation of the colors, please stand for the North Carolina Forest Service Honor Guard.
Honor Guard. Carry. Come. Forward. March.
Thank you again to the FFA students and the Honor Guard from our own North Carolina Forest Service. Now I have probably the easiest job of the day to introduce to you the best Commissioner of Agriculture in the United States of America. Nearly 2,000 employees in the Department of Agriculture have the pleasure of having the best boss we could possibly have. And he's a servant of North Carolina. He's now in his 5th term as serving as Commissioner of Agriculture for this great state and really a North Carolina institution. And so there's not much that I can add to that other than to say, please welcome to the stage our own Commissioner of Agriculture, Steve Troxler.
I do want to thank you for being here today for the 16th Annual Ag Forum. The pandemic had a lot of ups and downs, and one of the casualties was the Ag Forum back here today. There's so much information to share with you. The pandemic did challenge us in ways that I don't think any of us could have imagined before it happened, but the good thing is agriculture stood strong during the pandemic. We have adapted, we have changed, we have learned, and I think we will carry these lessons forward even as the pandemic wanes when it wanes. I could not be any prouder of our ag and agribusiness industries, and I thank everybody for continuing to be that rock that people need during the pandemic. We've had shortages of food in the grocery store, but it's never been because farmers weren't doing their job every day. We've had supply chain issues, we've had employment issues, but agriculture has done what they do best. Every day they got up, they went to work, they were productive, they were efficiency, and they fed the people. And we're going to continue to do that. I do want to thank the members of FFA and 4-H for being here today. There's nothing more important than we do than train the next generation of leaders in North Carolina, and both groups are so good at that, and I thank the advisors for their work in doing that. We got a lot to do today, and we're going to start out with an economic forecast, so to speak, some information from Professor Blake Brown. Dr. Brown doesn't need any introduction, especially in ag circles, but he has done so much work for the state, especially when it comes to ag policy, and particularly tobacco policy. I got to know Dr. Brown very well during the BIO discussions, and he was instrumental in writing a lot of the work that was done for the tobacco BIO. He's a Hugh C. Kaiser Professor of Agriculture and Resource Economics at NC State, and he earned his bachelor's degree in animal science, a master's degree in agricultural economics, and a PhD in economics at NC State. So he is the full gamut when it comes to NC State. I thank Dr. Brown for all the work that he did during the BIO and since then. But he also had another position. He recently served as senior economist for the Council of Economic Advisors in the executive office of the President of the United States. I can tell you he was a very good employee there. In fact, while he was there were a lot of discussions about trade, and I would ask him some inside information questions. He wouldn't tell me. That was disappointing, but I understood it. He did the job, he did it well. So I'm going to bring Dr. Blake Brown up, and I hope he has a rosy economic outlook. We've heard a few in the past year about how good things we're getting, but now we might have some problems on the horizon, so maybe he's going to talk about that. Dr. Brown?
Thank you, Commissioner. It has been a pleasure to work with Commissioner Troxler for all these years. We got to know each other back in the 90s and work with so many of you. You know, some of y'all are getting to look a little older. How did that happen to us? I was looking around, we didn't get to do this last year, so 2 years ago we were together. It is good to be with you this morning, and so am I going to be optimistic? Well, it depends. On one hand, we'll talk about some of the pros, and on the other one, we'll talk about some of the cons. I am an economist, so I have to be true to that. So, all right, let's see if I can make this thing work. All right, there we go. My colleague and good friend, Dr. Mike Walden, retired this year, and he's not with us. And I'm used to following him when he talks about sort of the general economy and sets it up for me to talk about the ag economy. So I'm just going to say a couple of words about the general economy, and we'll roll on. Most of this is what you've been hearing. We're still set, and the forecast is still there from the Fed and from others, for about 4% growth coming up this coming year in gross domestic product. So the economy's still on a very good track. And I know everybody's been hearing about when are interest rates going to go up. I think that's all been built into expectations. They probably will this year. I think the Fed, in my opinion, is doing a good job staying on top of this. So we'll see, and hopefully, they'll stay on top of this. We won't let inflation or anything get ahead of us. The unemployment rate's really low, and you know that better than me if you've been trying to hire workers lately. It's difficult. We had a lot of workers that exited the workforce. We had programs that helped them stay out of the workforce. Some of those programs are over. Maybe it'll get a little bit better, but I think it's going to continue to be a challenge for us, hiring the people we need. And when you look at the dollar, we're going to talk more about this because it's very important to ag. The dollar is a little weaker than it was last year. It's a little weaker than it was a few years ago. It's actually strengthened some in the latter part of 2021. That's a big help to us. Our only issue is that some of our competitors have more favorable exchange rates even than we do. But it's still good that the dollar is not strengthened as much as it was a few years ago. All right, let's talk about the ag economy, and specifically, when in USDA, they put out this forecast every February, and then they update it towards the end of the year. This is the update towards the end of 2021. And what you'll see is that we had about $133 billion in net farm income in 2021. That's good. When they did their forecast back in February of 2021, they forecasted it to actually be down a little bit. And the reason is that when they did that forecast, they were anticipating that government payments were going to be considerably lower, and they were. But the good thing is, we in general in the U.S. had a very good year in ag, right? I know here in North Carolina, it was good to have a good year for a change. We had good yields, we had good weather, we had good commodity prices, so things went really well for us in 2021, and we bought inputs before they started going up, right? So now the trick going into 2022 is how do we hang on to some of those profits and not let them all go as we roll into these higher input costs, and we'll talk more about that. But, their forecast was wrong, I guess is my point here. We actually did see an increase in 2021 in terms of net farm income, and that was because of just the strong prices we saw and the good yields we saw in general. All right, I'm not going to put up a lot of slides of all our different crops, but this one on corn and soybeans kind of illustrates what went on with every crop we had. If we put tobacco, cotton, peanuts, most any crop I can think of up here, it would look like this. And you can see the corn's the blue bar up very substantially. Two reasons. One, we had a good year, we had good yields, but also we planted more corn because we had very, very favorable prices going into this. I had a farmer tell me yesterday that he booked a lot of his corn at $6.35. It was just a good year, and we liked that because we needed one. It had been a while since we had one of those years. And the same for soybeans, even though not quite as much as corn, and as, like I said, all these other crops as well. All right, if we look at the prices, I've already said several times our prices were up. And that was really good in the crop arena. I know I've got some beef cattle, and so prices were up for beef cattle as well. Prices were up for hogs too. But it was a little bit more of a mixed game from some of our livestock producers. On the crop side, it was really a good situation. I put the price of hogs up here because it's so important in North Carolina. We get 2/3 of our agricultural income from livestock and poultry. So we're a big hog state, as everybody knows, a big poultry state. And yes, hog prices were up. But the only thing is that when you look at this, most of the people that work in the hog industry say you need to be in that upper 60-cent range, close to 70 cents for break even. And so we went up above it for a while, but now we've come back down below it. And the pork industry is still facing some issues in terms of disease and some other problems they have that has kept them maybe from increasing the sow herd as much as they would like. But, their prices are still not quite as strong as they would like either. So a little different from crops. Excuse me. Okay, this is the big story for 2022, right? And everybody's been scratching their heads trying to figure out what to do. Input costs are just out the wazoo, right? And so all the farmers I know have been wondering, do I go ahead and buy inputs? A lot of farmers I know have. Do I wait to see if fertilizer prices come down? What strategy do I take rolling forward? Do I let my marginal land sit out this year? Because like I said, we're trying to hold on to this good year we had in 2021. We don't want to give it all up. Yes, commodity prices are still strong, Cotton, futures did I see like $1.30? You know, that would just sound incredible, wouldn't it? Some of these prices on commodities sound great until you start looking at the input side of it. And then you're thinking, wow, I don't know if that's going to cover the cost or not, even though it sounds really good. Fertilizer's the big one. This is the one that we've seen the largest increase of, and in particular nitrogen. You've got 3 different types of nitrogen on here: urea, ammonium nitrate, and then anhydrous ammonia, I think, are the 3. And you can see that those prices have gone up 80 to 100% this fall. And that's our big one. But it's also true of potash, and that's because we import a lot of our potash. We've just seen potash prices go out the roof, and we've seen phosphate prices go out the roof, even though we produce a lot of phosphate even in our own state. So fertilizer is the big fly in the ointment. Now, other chemical costs have gone up too, right? I mean, the story is Roundup or glyphosate. It's gone up, 300% or something. So every input you look at has gone up significantly. But fertilizer, of course, is so important. This is a slide from American Farm Bureau. This is from back in December. They were trying to forecast how much fertilizer prices would go up for different costs, for different crops. And you can see how much it affects corn and soybeans. They don't have tobacco on there, but I can tell you, tobacco is probably going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 20%. It's a big cost increase, and you know, the question in everybody's mind is, what do we do about that? Well, there's several sources. I mean, we've all heard about shipping costs, but here's just something to kind of get it concrete in your mind. This is from a logistic company that tracks trucking, and this is in particular is for refrigerated trucking, reefers. And the first one's an interesting ratio. It's the number of loads that are available or need to be hauled relative to the number of trucks that are available to haul those loads. And this is for reefers. That has gone up 64% in the last year. In other words, the number of loads that need to be hauled in reefers is 64% higher than it was last year relative to the number of trucks. So there's just a lot of goods out there chasing a few trucks. And trucking is probably one of the most difficult ones. If you've tried to get a truck to haul anything, I know I was trying to get some stuff hauled from eastern North Carolina up to my farm in the mountains. You can't find a tractor trailer to do it, can you? I mean, I beg and plead and pester them until they finally, okay, you pestered me long enough, maybe I can back off. But it's tough. They're covered up with work, and you know, that's what's going on there. And frankly, I was talking to Daniel Green from the Burley Co-op out in Tennessee yesterday, and he was talking about how hard it was to get their tobacco to the port. And then you got to figure out how to get it shipped overseas, right? But just getting it to the port to be containerized is a challenge right now. And I know our sweet potato farmers are really struggling with that now, trying to figure out how they're going to get those potatoes exported. It's not just trucks, but it's also shipping. And you know, we've all seen the stories. There was a 60-minute story about how many ships are backed up in the harbor waiting to be unloaded. Somebody was telling me yesterday that the shippers have slowed down the speed at which the boats run because they don't want them to just sit there for 3 weeks. They're trying to get there slower and maybe give them more options to go to other ports if they have to. But it's really a challenge. And so, before I go into labor, so you say, well, what's going on here with all this, and is it going to end? And you hear a lot of economists talk about transitory inflation versus permanent inflation. And in the economic community, there's a lot of talk about which is it or what combination. It is a combination of both. I mean, we went through a period in the pandemic where we really did not buy very much at all, especially durable goods. Building, housing really slowed down, and then all of a sudden, as the government started injecting more money into the economy, as we began to recover from some of the aspects of the pandemic, even though we're not out of it yet, then all of a sudden, all that pent-up demand came on at once. And just imagine, let's say you're a lumber mill, and you're churning out 2x4s, 2x6s, you know, structured lumber and all these kinds of things. You went through a period where you didn't really have much demand for your product. You probably had to lay people off with the pandemic. You had to slow down. So what do you do now all of a sudden that there's this explosion in demand? Are you going to run out and spend $2 or $3 million to upgrade your mill so you can meet the current demand? No, because you'd be like everybody else, whether you're a fertilizer supplier, a shipper, a trucking company or whatever, you're like, well, I don't want to overinvest now because 3 years from now it's probably not going to be like this. And so that creates a real problem in the short run in terms, of very limited infrastructure in terms of the current demand, and so we just see prices go out the wazoo. So yes, a large part of it is transitory. There may be a permanent component, though, particularly with our government, if we're not careful overdoing the stimulus. We tend to overdo things. And that's why I think the Fed is watching this so closely. All right, labor. We used to be the #1 H-2A state in the country, and now we're 5th. And the reason is that states like California and Washington that you see on here had to move from using undocumented workers to H-2A workers as the border enforcement of the border got tighter. And so we had 275,000 H-2A positions certified in 2021. We're moving into 2022 now. The big story for us in North Carolina is that the wage rate, the adverse effect wage rate, has gone up over $1 an hour, $14.16 an hour. Very expensive, particularly when you consider housing, transportation here, a lot of the other expenses of getting them around when they're here. I tell folks, this is the best foreign aid program we have. And those folks that are hard workers can come here, they can legally work here, they can make a lot of money. They can make more money in 1 hour than they do in 1 day in their own country, and they send almost all of it home. And labor advocates need to understand the harder you make this to use, the fewer of them that are going to get to come here, and the less of that money is going to go back to their homes. And you're not improving their welfare by that. Now, what we would like on the farm side, we'd like a program that was a little less expensive to use and a whole lot less difficult to use. I can tell you when I worked in Washington, there was a lot of work done to try to make H-2A broader, that livestock producers could use it easily, maybe a little less expensive, a lot easier to use, but that's just not going to go anywhere. Immigration reform is probably one of the most difficult issues we see. We talk about it all the time, but it's hard to get folks within the same administration or within the same party on the same page, much less get everybody across the aisles. So I'm not very hopeful that we're going to see a lot of reform in immigration. I don't think we'll see reform in immigration legislation for that reason. However, the executive branch can have a huge effect on how the laws that we currently have are enforced. I can remember 1986 when I worked in Johnston County and as an area farm management agent working with tobacco farmers, and we got really worried because we thought we were going to lose our workers because we had the Immigration Reform Act of 1986, the last time we had significant reform in immigration law. But what happened was, yes, it made it a lot stricter, but then they didn't enforce it. And so what you see here is what was happening. This is a great illustration from the American Immigration Council. And you'll see the light blue portion are the number of successful unlawful entries. So these were folks coming across the border, they didn't get caught, they got a job, and they were able to live here undocumented. And that was a lot more than the folks that got sent back, and there was a good chance if you got sent back, you could try it again and make it across. Very different. And that was not one party or the other. Basically, we weren't really enforcing the border, and when you don't enforce the border, by default, your immigration policy is if you can get across the border, you get to stay here. That's your default immigration policy. It doesn't matter what the law says. And so, interestingly, when in the Obama administrations, when they began to clamp down on this, you didn't hear much about it, but there were raids of poultry plants and other places that were using undocumented workers, and we saw the number of unsuccessful lawful entries go down. And then, of course, President Trump was very vocal about it, and he made sure that we clamped down on the border, and you can see it went down further. The big question is now is what will the current administration and whoever the next administration do? Because that's going to determine immigration policy. In other words, the real in effect policy. We get real mixed signals from the current administration. We hear them saying, y'all can come, but then when they transmit that information to the people that have to enforce the border, they're clamping down, and we had more expulsions last year, or people returned over the border than we'd had in I don't know how many years. It was a huge number. And so you have to think, I feel sorry for the Border Patrol people, because exports. You hear one thing out of Washington on the media, and then they get told another thing that they have to do here at the border. It must be, and it makes them look like the bad guys. So it must be very, so anyway, we're going to have to wait and see. It will all depend on how the current immigration laws are enforced or not enforced, whether we go back to a porous border. If we go back to a porous border, I think California and Washington will abandon the H-2A program and move back to undocumented workers. And I'm not sure where it leaves us, frankly. All right, trade, really important. We export a lot of our ag goods. If you look here, you'll see the blue bar is the 2015 to 2020 average exports for these commodities. Then you see 222 forecast and 221 forecast there, the green and the gray. And you can see in all cases we were up in 221 and 222. There are a lot of reasons for that, for those products. Part of it on the livestock part was China had African swine fever. They lost a huge portion of their swine herd, and they had no choice but to import a lot of pork, and they also imported a lot of chicken to make up for that. And as they've exited that and come back to life, and they've done a really, really good job getting their swine industry back, you know, now they're importing a lot less meat, but they're importing a lot more corn and soybeans to feed that new swine herd that they put in place. And a lot of that has to do with the exchange rate that I mentioned earlier. The dollar is somewhat weaker than it was at the beginning of last year. You can see it went down the previous years too, but it has strengthened some, but a weaker dollar has helped us in this regard. But I'm going to say some more about other countries' exchange rates in a few minutes, because it's not just yours, it's your competitors too. All right? If you look at soybeans, good illustration here, you'll see the blue portion is to China. We had a huge increase in soybean exports as we went into 2020, and if you looked at 2021, it would begin to tail off some, but this was as they rebuilt their swine herd, was the reason China was importing so many more soybeans. And if you look at pork, I like this one because you see exports went up, and let's see, I think I've got, China is, I believe, the blue one. I can't see my graph now, but anyway, China went way up. But I like to show this graph because when you look at the red portion, that's Mexico. We have talked so much about China over the last few years, and it's good. It's a really important export market. Despite all the problems, it's still going to be a really important export market for us. But we don't need to forget about some of these other major importers. Mexico traditionally, until China had African swine fever, Mexico was the largest export destination for pork. Mexicans eat a lot of pork and a lot of chicken, and they get a lot of it from us. So we need to stay focused that there are a lot of different export customers that we want to work with, not just China, because China, unfortunately, is going to be somewhat problematic going forward, although the economic entanglement between our two economies is going to keep us working together because of that. All right, peanuts, just another illustration. You can see that it's not just China, although China imported a bunch of peanuts, and they're a big grower too, but it's also Mexico and Canada. All right, flue-cured tobacco, it was all about China, wasn't it? When they pulled out because of the trade war, we had to call it the trade negotiations. We couldn't say trade war. But because of that, our tobacco production plummeted to the lowest level in over 100 years. China came back, thankfully, in 2021, and who would have thought we would have just been tickled to death to have 300 million pounds of flue-cured under contract a few years ago. We would have thought that was terrible, but now we're feeling pretty good about it, and we may see that increase some this year. I think contracts, to a large extent, are flat, but we may see some uptick in that, as I know a lot of you are hearing pounds announced now, and other things going on with tobacco. All right, China policy then. Just to keep in mind, it's going to remain somewhat strained just because of the security issues, because of the global competition between our government and their government. It doesn't matter what think tank you go to or which side of the aisle you go to. Everybody realizes China is a security threat now, and President Xi has taken them hard back towards communism, despite the impact it might have on their economy. He doesn't seem to care. He's taking it back. So we are economically dependent to a large extent. So that will keep us working together, don't get me wrong, but it's going to be a somewhat strained relationship and unfortunately volatile. And for a state monopoly like China Tobacco that buys their tobacco, it makes it even more volatile because they are so heavily linked to the Chinese government. All right. Okay, here's the other thing on exchange rates. This is Brazil's change rate to the euro, which is one of their big customers. If we looked at their exchange rates to the dollar, it would look the same. Right now, the Brazilian real to $1 is about 5.49. So it used to be about 3 real per US dollar, very similar to the euro. So my point is, exchange rates for Brazilian farmers are very favorable now. They've had some real challenges with weather over the last season that is impacting the tobacco crop, impacting some of their other crops. But because exchange rates are so favorable, I think we will see Brazil try to increase their production in all sectors this fall when they start planting in the Brazilian spring. And that includes tobacco, soybeans, cotton, whatever, because they are in a very good situation exchange rate wise, and they'll plan as much as they can and hope they have a better weather year. All right, the environment and farm policy. This is a web page at USDA called Climate Solutions. I assure you it is not from the administration I was. Sonny did not have that up on his website whenever USDA was under his jurisdiction. This is sort of the new mantra. When you start hearing folks talk about the 2023 Farm Bill, this is going to be the theme. And if you look at USDA's priorities, this came out early last year from Secretary Vilsack. Basically equity and inclusion, climate and regenerative agriculture. Rural economic development is one they do share with Sonny. I think that's the only point that's the same. Nutrition security and assistance, open and competitive markets, USDA employee morale, forestry service. You're going to see climate change conservation programs are going to be the big emphasis when the 2023 Farm Bill comes out. It's going to look very different than previous Farm Bills. So we need to stay tuned and we need to stay engaged to make sure that what comes out is helpful to U.S. farmers. All right, other policy issues. This is one that's ongoing that you don't want to get off. We thought we had put this waters of the U.S. to bed, thought it was done, but it's coming back. And we don't want EPA making rules over the mud puddle in my barn lot. We want it to go back to what are real navigable waters, not some toy boat navigable waters or something, right? So you're going to have to stay engaged with this when the battle is being fought again, unfortunately. All right, well, let me go through some takeaways because I know my time is up. Let me finish up here. Just some takeaways. We will continue to see strong prices. I really do think that. But we'll see lower government payments. The real question is how much are input costs going to go up and how are we going to deal with that this year? How do you keep some of those profits, in your pocket from the previous year? Continued strong export commodities. China's going to remain a strained relationship, but still a very important market for us. Intense competition from Brazil this year. They're always our competitor, and they're good farmers down there, so we got to keep that in mind. And we'll just have to see how immigration law is enforced. And I'll wind up with some good wisdom, because this is better wisdom than any economist could give you. And everybody knows this. My friend Jerome Vick, quotation from him, he said, if you can't pencil it out in the shade, you can't plow it out in the sunshine. So this is the time of year. You better be putting a sharp pencil to it and try to keep some of those 2022 profits in your pocket. Thank you all. It's been great to be with you. Commissioner, I'll turn it back over.
I think there's probably a couple of questions on everybody's mind. I saw the unemployment rate that is getting back close to what it was pre-pandemic. But where did all the workers go? I don't remember every business in North Carolina having a sign on the door, need workers. You ride up and down the road, the trucks have got, business signs on it, need workers. Where did the workers go?
Sure. Well, I don't know all the answer to that, but I will tell you some of them decided to stay home because the unemployment check was better than what they were getting at work, or at least they didn't have to work for it. Those are ending, so we hopefully will see some of them back. I think we saw a lot of folks decide that, you know, they could probably go ahead and retire and get out of the workforce now. And then we've seen a lot of people changing where they're at in the workforce during this time. And trucking's a good example of that. We don't have enough truck drivers, but we're seeing a migration of other people into trucking because it looks so good now. And you got all this pent-up demand that's just driving so much demand now. We just don't have the workforce to do it. I think those are parts of the answer.
The other question is, think I saw a figure recently that the U.S. economy grew at over 5% last year. But I've also seen inflation rates of 4.5%. Is that growth in the economy real growth, or is it inflation factored, or are we kind of just spinning our wheels with inflation?
Well, that is real growth, and the economy is really growing. You know, the question on inflation goes back to, is that higher inflation a one-time thing, or is it more permanent? And you know, I think the Fed learned some really hard lessons back in the 70s. There's a few of you here I see that remember that. But when inflation just went out the roof, and what happened was the Fed basically sat there in the 70s and didn't do anything. They let inflation get out of control. Then you had Paul Volcker come in about 1980, and he said, wait a minute, we got to correct this. It's just getting way out of control. And when he went to correct it, the way you correct it is restrict the money supply, raise interest rates, and everybody remembers what happened with that. We don't have many young people that remember 20% interest rate, but that's what the Fed had to do to get things back under control. So I feel pretty confident the Fed understands what happened then, and they're going to raise interest rates slowly so that we don't have to have an abrupt adjustment later. So I may be wrong, but I'm fairly confident they're going to handle it pretty well.
Blake, I do appreciate it, and thank you so much, but I do look forward, before I retire, you coming up here, and all you've got to say is farmers are going to get filthy rich this year, and I'll be satisfied.
The whole world could change. We could have good weather, Brazil has a terrible drought, and China has a terrible drought, and they have to buy everything from us, and then we'd all be filthy rich. So there is an if statement that could be this.
Thank you.